Hey guys, welcome back to the Talkoffame podcast. And today I'm literally so excited to introduce you to Anina Estrem. Anina is an experienced food justice advocate bringing stories, best practices, and innovation to the fight against hunger. She has spent over a decade increasing access to healthy foods for diverse communities with a specialization and passion for food banking. Her ultimate goal is to make a more diverse food fun, but knows this can't be achieved until everyone has access to the food they need to thrive. As someone who kind of oversees food justice in the NEPA area, she is doing such amazing work in terms of fighting hunger and making sure everyone has access to food. And it turns out me and her actually know a mutual connection, which is crazy to think about. We know someone that does a similar work job as we do, but I really appreciate you joining us today and can't wait to talk with you about the amazing work you're doing.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So to first start off, I know when people hear food justice, they're like, "Oh my God, like that's never heard that term. What is that term?" But how do you define food justice? Like, what exactly is this term? I know this term might have been heard a million times before from people I work with, but in case no one has heard this term, what is that?
Absolutely, it can be nebulous. So food justice is a holistic perspective that recognizes that we need justice in every step of the food system, from harvest and prep to distribution and consumption. Our system currently prioritizes profits over anything else, and usually at the expense of the climate, of agricultural systems, and community health. So food justice is really the movement to bring sovereignty and equity to every individual who partakes in the food system and not just focus on the profiteers.
Like, how does that work? Like, I never knew that part of it. Like, I knew it was like profit or whatever it's called. Like, I knew it was some things that involved that, but how does that system work in terms of getting everyone food justice in everything that sort how does that process usually work? Because I have absolutely no idea.
Right. It is a huge undertaking. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's fun because you can approach it from so many different angles.
Mhm.
There are people who specialize in climate justice, so thinking about sustainable agriculture and responsible growing practices, or food waste angle, or labor rights and how we're taking care of our farm workers. So there's many different angles. I don't know that anybody can be a food justice expert. We all find our little niche to focus on. And then together as hopefully a grand network, we can start to impact real change.
Yeah, because I know with food justice, everyone, defines it in many different ways. I know, and when I ask people this question, they're like, oh, food justice is this, food justice is that. Like everyone defines it in different ways. And I'm just like, which one should I believe? Like, which is the actual definition? What's the actual definition? And I know with having someone that's in this field and kind of oversees that, I know with having experience as someone that kind of sees day-to-day things in terms of food justice, food distribution, and food insecurity, it can come in many different ways.
Yeah, yeah. And there are so many different angles. And I guess to really boil it down, you could say food justice is making sure that every individual has the power and autonomy to make their own food choices so that I can make decisions on my own best interest rather than what's available to me or what I can afford or what is accessible with whatever limitations are around me.
Because I know with a lot of people, like I know with people, they're like, "Oh my God, I want this food, like this food I'm obsessed with, but I don't have the money." Like I know, but that is mostly what causes food insecurity is how much money you have and what you have access to, and to have those access, we want to make sure everyone has that affordable and has the resources to get those foods, even though to make sure they are healthy and make sure they're good for someone's nutrition for every single day, even though they might not have the money or they might not have the access. Because I know money is one of the main parts in having food to live every single day. That's one main reasons that to cause food insecurity is the money we have and having accessibility.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Hunger in the US at least is not a food shortage problem. We have
Mhm.
all the food we need. We just not everybody has the money to get to it if they're in a rural location or just to afford it if they're super low income. So I think it's super important to always lift up it is not a shortage of food. It is simply access to it, which primarily is money.
Exactly. And of course, having the passion for food justice, I read that you actually grew up on a farm, right?
I did, yes, milking goats and raising chickens and gardening.
Ooh, so is that how your journey to work in food justice started, or did it start with something else?
No, I think you could definitely say that was my starting point. It was a small hobby farm, so everyone in my family had to play a role and take a part. So it was always a very communal experience. Everybody had to be engaged and active, and it was really fun. So I knew pretty early on I wanted to do something in the food justice realm and started out in a program teaching nutrition, gardening, and cooking education in rural low-income communities. And I found that the kids I was working with loved doing it and they were enthusiastic about every food I had or project. But when they went home from school, they didn't have access to any of that. So I realized that while those efforts are important, we can't really focus on making food fun until they have access to food. And so I did a little bit of a pivot to food banking and never looked back.
Ooh, so I love that. Is it all those people that came? Are they volunteers or is it family?
For my family,
Yeah, like for your family farm.
yeah, we were all, it was very small. So yeah,
Ooh, like that.
everybody had a role.
Yeah, like I love how like you came to realize that. Because of course, when people go to like a farm like your family farm, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I get to hang out with these animals and family and just do something and to get some food, harvesting, and that sort of thing." But when they go home, they're like, what do I do now? Like, what do I eat? Because of course, when we work on the farm, you get all these crops, you get all these amazing produce and all these things, and then when you go home, you don't have that. So when you
Exactly.
work on a farm, you're just like, this is the only thing I have to get me like produce and to eat good, rather than having going home and eating junk food and not having anything good to eat.
Exactly. And most of the students I was working with were super rural and super low income. So they'd never even had exposure to any of the stuff that I was teaching them. And so while certainly it's powerful to give them a foundation in kale salad or growing radishes or making beet smoothies, but those tools, they can't do much with them if they didn't have access to those foods at home.
Right? Which is crazy because I know with having a realization, especially having at that young age, I know a lot of people don't know what food insecurity or food justice is until maybe they're a teenager or adult. Like I didn't know what food justice was until last year. Like I had no idea. Like I was like, that's a thing? Like, are you serious? Because of course it's not often talked about. Well, especially here in NEPA, I never had those resources and no one really taught me what that was. I just kind of like, oh, I just eat food and produce. I never thought about how people were facing food insecurity, which is something that is crazy to me every single day that I never knew what that was previous years.
It's really easy to not think about it when it's not a problem for you. And I mean, it's great that we can take food for granted, but I think it's also really fun to help people discover that this is a problem and talk about ways to solve it because there are a lot of options out there once we get our community digging into it.
And there's honestly tons of ways. Of course, I live in NEPA, so there's literally tons of farmers here, and there's so many good farmers here that I'm just like, oh my gosh, which one should I pick? There's so many, but it's like with going to food distributions. I know we'll be talking about this in a little bit on your journey with food distribution, but with having that food distribution time, we know we have some like hillside farms, which if you're from NEPA or from Pennsylvania, you might know what that is. The local farm here, but there's so many good farms that offer produce and offer workshops and all those things to people that are dealing with that. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this is just crazy to me. So I'm like, as someone who works for an organization and tries to get involved with different organizations like this, like I'm just like, I'm literally learning something new every single day. But it's like we're having a like to see a bunch of people that are dealing with this. Like it's like amazing how communities are coming together for people that are suffering with food insecurity and lacking access to food.
And there's a lot of good energy. That's one of the things actually that the pandemic really brought us. Food
Mhm.
banking and emergency food access was really static for a long time. And then, the pandemic upset everything around us, and we had to reevaluate all of our anti-hunger systems. And so now is really this exciting period of innovation where everybody is a little more willing to experiment and to play around and to make mistakes and fail. So that's one of the reasons why I have so much fun doing this, is this energy now to play and see what happens.
Yeah, and that you made me realize I'm so glad you brought the pandemic because I know with the pandemic everyone was like at home and everything, but it really made people not get food, like getting produce and stuff. Of course, everything was shut down. You couldn't go in person. You couldn't see people because everyone, was scared to get sick. It was a new thing. Like never, it was a point where research or vaccines and nothing before they came out. It was kind of like everything just went and dropped down and nothing happened. So it's like when during that period, it made me realize now that I'm just like, I feel honestly horrible for people that were struggling during that time. During the pandemic, pre-pandemic, I should say, they were lacking access to food and everything was shut down and were starving themselves to death because everything was shut down. And I'm just like, gosh, like I cannot imagine for those people that are not having those type of food during the pandemic when everything closed.
And we got a lot of data about hunger during the pandemic. If you remember, there were extra payments from the government for unemployment benefits, and then there were also boosts in SNAP, or formerly known as food stamps. So people who were able to get those resources were getting a lot more than they had been used to, and hunger rates didn't escalate. Hunger rates stayed pretty much the same. So we know that giving people money to buy food fights hunger. So we knew that already, but we were able to demonstrate it in this very clear scenario to show that it's not a problem of people not working. It's not a problem of food shortage. It is simply having the money to buy food.
Exactly. And what are some ways people could come together to fight against hunger? Because I know there's so many ways you could get resources and help out, but what are some ways that kind of helped you to fight hunger?
Great question. So the obvious answers are to donate food or money or to volunteer with an anti-hunger program, and those are certainly awesome ones. I always like to start with recommending that people just think a little more about hunger. We in America are pretty conditioned to think that hunger is a personal failure, that people aren't working hard enough, and that they have to earn the right to food. But we need food to live. So if we're assuming that people have to earn the right to live, that's a pretty problematic assumption that I think is worth digging in and evaluating whether we really believe that. Because unfortunately, this attitude has sort of permeated all of our policies, and most of our anti-hunger policies depend on the assumption that you need to be working a certain amount or have a certain amount of income, or all these limitations and conditions that are really making assumptions about you as an individual person. So I think by really thinking about where we get our assumptions about hunger and digging into that, we can start to just change policies from the bottom up.
Ooh, that is so well said. I love that. And to kind of wrap up, like why can't food be fun to eat and get involved into it everyone has access?
Mm.
Which is a question that I've been dying to ask.
It's a great one. So at my last food pantry that I worked at, we once had a client come in shouting, "I love Brussels sprouts," which was a surprise. And so I followed up with her, and she said that she'd never had Brussels sprouts before because her income was so limited. She didn't really feel like she could safely risk buying a food that she might not like. If you buying something new or cooking a new recipe always has the risk of failure. And if you don't have the money to make up for that, then it's not worth the risk. So we have to make sure that people have room to fail in their food lives and have the money to be able to try something new and have a backup if it doesn't work. And then that lets people have fun in the kitchen. I love to play in the kitchen, and I know a big part of that is the risk of making something that I don't want to eat. And I'm a lot more willing to take that risk if I know I have backup. So having fun with food really depends on having room to fail.
I know. That is something that I had to come to realization is that like I literally love to eat junk food, and it took me a while to kind of realize that like I need to try good foods and buy some foods that are actually good for me, even though I don't like it, or may not have tried it, but may not like. And that's what kind of makes things fun is I'm like, might as well buy it for one, like buy something for once, and then eat it. If I don't like it, I don't have to buy it again. And so it's like, but having that story of that lady screaming about Brussels sprouts, I'm just like, Maja gets excited over something, whether it's food that you may not have tried it, but it's like might as well make the fun of it, even though you never tried it. Because that's what makes food fun, because everything is worth a try, no matter if you ate it or not.
Exactly. And food is also so much a part of our often emotional security or self-care. So having the room to add that and to buy a bag of potato chips, even though we know it's not healthy, if that makes you feel good and safe and cozy, then people should have room for that as well as to try Brussels sprouts or some other veggie they haven't eaten before.
And so, how can people connect with you? Because I know you are on a variety of different platforms, but how can people connect with you about your work?
Yeah, to follow along with all my anti-hunger work, I'm active on LinkedIn, and then I also have a blog at whodeservestoeat.com, where I do weekly posts really digging into these issues of hunger and food justice.
Awesome. Go check it out, everyone. I really appreciate everyone tuning in, and I really appreciate all the work you're doing. I definitely have to do a part two with you because there's so many questions that I have to ask, and this topic is really needed to be talked about because I know not everyone knows about this topic. And it's something that I know a lot of people suffer with, and to educate as much people as possible is really something that is needed for today's society, and I really thank you for everything you're doing.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure to talk with you.